Hello, everybody. Today's second review. I guess I didn't really need to say that. Hello, everybody, but I guess I always start every video like that, don't I? But anyway, today's second review is going to be of Black Phone 2, which I actually enjoyed just as much as the first one. So I tied it with the first one at an 8 out of 10. I think these movies are just so unique in the way they tell the story and the way they do horror that it just kind of separates itself from what I guess you would consider maybe other slasher films. Um, these are like a very kind of like slow burn film, and I do like that. That these movies don't rely on just the jump scares. They rely on like the psychological um, part of it more, and that to me is scarier because this character could potentially from the first movie it's not that far fetched that somebody's going to be kidnapping kids and killing them. So it's not a very far fetched idea. Now, of course, obviously, in this movie, he's come back to haunt them, which makes sense because if all of the connections from the beginning of the movie just line up this story so well. So we have this girl in this phone booth out near this frozen lake. We have no idea why she's there. So I like the fact that they're kind of giving you a story without telling you anything from the very beginning of the movie because you're like, who is this character? How is she going to be related to the movie? And then you find out that she's the mother of the two kids. So that was pretty crazy. And she's actually connecting with her kid from a totally different time through the phone. So that was wild. So of course we obviously have the returning cast. We have Mason Thames as Finn, Ethan Hawke as the Grabber or Wild Bill Hickok or Hickok. So we'll learn more about that as I tell you the story. Madeline McGraw as Gwen, Jeremy Davies as Terrence, Miguel Mora as Ernesto, Ariana Rivas as Mustang, Demain Behair as Mondo, Anna Love as Hope, and then is it really is it Ma Beatty as Barbara? That's what it looks like. I might have written that very sloppily, so forgive me if I'm pronouncing that name wrong. But it might be Maeve Beatty. That sounds more right, doesn't it? I hope so. Anyway, yeah. So in the very beginning of this movie, the mother of the two kids, Hope, is on the phone, and little do we know that she's actually connecting with her daughter because the daughter's dreams. Um, sorry. Oh my God, what? So Gwen's dreams are becoming much stronger. I almost wouldn't call them dreams, though. In a sense, I would call them more like visions because she can kind of like see the future and the past. So even though she seems to be having these when she's asleep, mostly for the most part, it's almost like she's entering another realm. So it is a dreamlike state, but also a vision in the same sense. It's kind of like limbo in a weird way because she can see herself, but she it's almost like she can see herself, but she doesn't really have control over what happens. Um, which seems weird because it seemed like in the first movie she did have a little bit of control from what I'm remembering, or maybe she didn't. Maybe she was just so young that she didn't really know what was going on, and she was just kind of, seeing things, and she was kind of explaining it to the cops, and the cops, of course, were thinking that she was a little weird, and one of the girls at school calls her a witch, but the one guy that seems to be her love interest throughout the movie, you know, pretty much says that he doesn't find her weird at all. And of course, I guess his parents have kind of explained her like situation to him. Now, I'm not really sure exactly how his parents knew, but I guess from the first movie, Finn had been connecting with his brother. Now, Finn, on the other hand, can't see any of the stuff that's around him. So it makes it much harder for him to fight off anything, right? Because his only connection is through the phone. So whenever the grabber calls him, he has to pick up. And of course, it seemed the grabber was blaming him for what had happened and wanted revenge for obviously Finn killing him in the first movie. And he blamed Finn for the fact that he had to kill his own brother. So Now, again, obviously, none of this is really Finn's fault. This is just the grabber kind of trying to make up a reason to go after the two of them, right? And of course, now he's going to hurt Finn by trying to take Gwen away from him. So, kind of like an eye for an eye, which nor- normally would be a boring storyline, but all of the things that happen throughout the movie to connect the story of the grabber to these two kids, Finn and Gwen, was pretty interesting, I will admit. So, and of course, Terrence kind of had like his own storyline too. Throughout the movie, it seems that he's 3 years sober now. He's, kind of reconnecting with his kids. In the first movie, of course, he was drunk all the time and he was, beating them up and not a very loving parent, but it seemed that he has turned himself around and, he's a little bit more jokey with them. But when they find this camp, Alpine's Lake Camp, he says, he's not really into that whole religious stuff. He doesn't want them to go. Of course, they go against his will anyway, because they're old enough now to kind of, make their own decisions. If they can drive, he's not really going to stop them from doing what they want to do, right? Now, of course, the three of them go together. Now, he thinks they're going to this. I think he thinks they're going to this concert, but then Finn decides to go along with them. Now, Finn didn't want to go in the beginning, but of course he's going to be there to protect his sister, obviously, and, kind of be a barrier between her and this new so-called boyfriend, right? Um, which, yeah, he was Ernesto. And then, of course, when we get there, it seems like Finn might have found his own love interest, one of the other people who work at the camp, Mustang. And I was like, as soon as I saw that, I was like, no, Finn, don't be doing that. You got bigger fish to fry here, I think. So, um, it seemed that the grabber had started off at this camp, and these three boys that Finn connects with through the phone um, are the ones that the grabber's first kills. So, of course, he wasn't known by that name at the camp. He was known by Wild Bill Hickok. Oh my god, why do I want to keep saying Hillcock? That's so weird. Anyway, Wild Bill Hickok. So, of course, the camp owner that bought the camp is from the previous owners, is explaining, that he was like really good with the kids, so on and so forth. And of course, that's obviously what somebody of that caliber would want, right? He would want to be close to his victims, so it makes sense. And then kill them off one by one. And of course, they did mention that he was a really good skater, and he was always out on the ice. And then, of course, it kind of hits Mondo all of a sudden that, of course, that's where Wild Bill would have killed the kids, right? And then buried them under the ice. So now Gwen's visions are of the kids in the camp, and Finn is getting connected to them through the phone. And then, of course, he's obviously having all these calls from the grabber. And now the grabber is able to get inside of Gwen's visions and show her some of the truth. So it seems that the mother had the same sort of power as the daughter and passed it on. So I am interested to see exactly how far down the road we can go in this storyline, because, oh my god, if we can go deeper into the storyline and find out how deep their family lineage goes. But again, I don't want to take away from the character of the grabber. He needs to be involved in it somehow, no matter what, right? So I feel like we can't go too much further back in time, because then, of course, it would be like, how was he even alive during that time? Because I think it's like from like, what was it, was it like 1950s when it first started to like the 1980s? So he would have been like pretty young when he started killing, right? And then, of course, he would have been older by the time he met Finn and Gwen in the 70s, I believe. And now it's like 1982, I think, was the time we're at. And of course, Finn is kind of angry, and he's turned to drugs, so he's kind of following in his father's footsteps. And of course, he has these hallucinations. And I was like, dude, I would be, laying off of the drugs if I was having these hallucinations of the person who had kidnapped me when I was younger. And yeah, I feel like he's just using that to kind of cope, or maybe he's using that to face his fears a little bit. It's kind of a weird concept with him throughout the film because he's angry, he's fighting obviously a lot at school, not really doing too well, seems a little bit overprotective, kind of, shelled himself away from the rest of the world, and he's kind of a loner. He's become a loner. Now, of course, he definitely bears his heart in one part of the film, saying, he doesn't want to be angry anymore. He doesn't want to be scared anymore. But of course, his sister says, you're the bravest person I've ever met. You just need to, let go a little bit and stop hanging on to what has happened to you in the past. Because if you just let fear control you, right, you're never gonna live your life. You're just gonna be constantly in fear. Now, of course, in the visions, the grabber's able to get in there, right, into Gwen's dreams, and he is able to do damage, like real life damage, like the damage he's doing to her in her dreams, he's doing to her in real life. So they have to keep trying to pull her out of these dreams, but of course, um, he's able to even get a hold of all the other people, uh, regardless of whether they can see him or not. Of course, it was easier on the ice because you could see like the skate marks that he was making. So eventually, Finn and Gwen are able to team up, and they are able to actually kill the grabber, which is incredible because once they get all the kids out of the ice, the kids are free from where they're not supposed to be. And that was the big message of this movie that the kids were trying to get across. Like, we're not supposed to be where we are. We're supposed to be, free. And that was the only way to set these kids free and I guess kind of like save their souls, essentially, was what I was getting from that, which was also cool. And then just the mask changes, and again, they did a fabulous job with the mask changes and just making him look like he had come straight out of hell. And of course, him showing Gwen the truth about their mother, the fact that she had had the same powers and she had gone to the house before Finn was even captured, and she had seen the other kid, and then the grabber got her and killed her, and then the father blamed himself for their mother's death, and that's probably why he started drinking so heavily, right? Because he just couldn't cope with what had happened because he had thought that he had driven her to that point, but that just wasn't the case. And so now he had come to the camp to try to get the kids out, and of course he's trying to, plead with Gwen, you know, if there's, if you're in actual danger, we need to get you out of here, which is kind of, better than he was in the first film. But then she kind of throws it back in his face in an odd way, saying that, like, how are you going to get me to go with you? Are you going to beat me into the truck? And I was like, okay, well, your father's trying here to be a little bit of a better dad, so you didn't really necessarily need to do that to him. But I guess she's trying to, kind of make the point that she's going to stand her ground and stay. So they're looking for these three kids. They are able to find them all. She is actually able to use her powers and her vision to push the barrels up that these kids were in order to bring them to the surface. And then the grabber's not able to. Obviously, he's slowly losing power, right? Because he only has power as long as these kids are still trapped, which was a cool concept. And of course, Finn can't see him, so Finn's getting attacked by him, as well as everybody else, obviously, right? Throughout the movie, so that was kind of cool. The only one that is able to even fight him in any concept, or in any concept, the only one that has any powers against him is Gwen herself. Like, she's able to use her visions against him too. So that was kind of cool as well, that she's able to have the power to fight back once she, realizes that she can't be controlled by fear from him. So yeah, but it was definitely cool seeing like the fact that she was fighting him, and then all of the other people can't see him, so she's just getting like absolutely thrown around the room, and they don't know where he is, right? And of course they're getting hurt as well. And then Barb, the one camp counselor there, was just, she could have helped a lot more than she did. And she kind of got a little bit of what was coming to her at the end of the film when the grabber was able to trip her and break her nose. I was like, okay, I don't really feel so bad for you near the end of this film, because you definitely could have helped more than you did, and you weren't willing to give these kids any information. You kind of just blocked them out the entire time, and then hid when, things got dangerous until the very end of the film, of course, when you realize that maybe there was, something you could do to help. It was like, I don't know. It just almost seemed like she was kind of in the way more than anything. But um, what else was I going to say? The very end scene, obviously, where they kill him is pretty cool because Finn can't see. He's only going based on, like, um, feel, I guess. So he absolutely annihilates him in this movie, like, just smashes his head into the ice and then throws all the pieces of him into the frozen lake, and then it seems like the grabber's frozen there now. So I'm not really sure exactly what else they can do with the story. Like, have they finally defeated him? Or is there going to be more to the storyline without these two characters in it? I feel like that would take away from the film, though. Uh, which is, yeah, I feel like that would take away from the series if they didn't have just this cast in it anyway. So maybe one where they're adults and there's another storyline I feel like could potentially be something. Um, but yeah, other than that, the only downfall to this thing I felt was like some of the lines weren't really necessarily needed. Like it felt like a lot of the line delivery was good, but some of the lines were still a little cheesy, which is unfortunate because that did take away from the film just a bit. I think it almost would have been a bit better if they hadn't have added that in. Some lines just weren't needed, but it is what it is. That's really the only part that I didn't like about this film. Everything else I thought was great, and I would definitely recommend going to see it in theaters because these films are just I find they're so unique in the way they tell the horror, uh, in the way they do the horror genre. So yeah, 10 out of 10. 8 out of 10 for this film, just like the first one, and I will see you guys in the next review. Bye bye for now.